Here we are, we're checking out section 2 in chapter 8, solving some of these quadratic equations with fractions and some of them that come out with i's. Let's start by moving everything to one side. If I subtract 5 halves from both sides, I get 1/8 x squared plus x minus 5 halves equals 0. We don't want to plug in fractions into the quadratic formula, so I'm going to multiply by the common denominator, which is 8. 8 times 1/8 gives me 1x squared. 8 times x gives me 8x. And 8 times negative 5 halves gives me negative 20. Let's plug that into the quadratic formula. Although factoring seems like that might work for factoring too, but since we're doing the quadratic formula, let's do it. X equals negative 8 plus or minus the square root. 8 squared is 64 minus 4 times 1 times negative 20, all over 2 times 1. Simplifying that, I'm going to have negative 8 plus or minus, well, negative 4 times 1 times negative 20 gives me positive 80. Positive 80 and 64 gives me the square root of 144 over 2. Let's simplify that into negative 8 plus or minus 12 over 2. Using the plus route, negative 8 plus 12 gives me 4. 4 divided by 2 is 2. Negative 8 minus 12 is negative 20. Negative 20 divided by 2 is negative 10. Let's take a look at number 18 next. Number 18 says 1/2 y squared equals y plus a half. Again, we're going to get everything on one side. We want it so the squared term is positive, so I'm going to minus y and minus a half, and I get 1/2 y squared minus y minus a half equals 0. We're going to multiply the whole thing by 2, which gives me y squared minus 2y minus 1. Again, we could plug that into the quadratic formula, and we will get y equals negative 2 would be 2 plus or minus the square root of negative 2 squared is 4 minus 4 times 1 times negative 1 all over 2 times 1. Simplifying that, I get 2 plus or minus negative 4 times 1 times negative 1 is positive 4. 4 and 4 makes 8. Square root of 8, I'm going to simplify to 2 root 2 all over 2. Divide everything by 2. 1 plus or minus the square root of 2. Now we're going to do question number 20. 20 says y squared minus 8 equals 4y. Again, we need to get everything on one side, so I'm going to subtract 4y from both sides. And I get y squared minus 4y minus 8 equals 0. Plugging it into the quadratic formula, I get y equals negative 4 would be plus 4, plus or minus the square root. Negative 4 squared is 16, minus 4 times 1 times negative 8, all over 2 times 1. Simplifying, I get 4 plus or minus negative 4 times 1 times negative 8 is positive 32. Positive 32 and 16 is positive 48. Simplifying that, I'm going to have 48 is 16 times 3. Square root of 16 is 4 root 3 over 2. Looks like everything's divisible by 2, which gives me 2 plus or minus 2 root 3. Now let's jump to question number 26. 26, I have x times the quantity x plus 6 equals 2. I'm going to distribute and subtract 2 from both sides, and I'm going to have x squared plus 6x minus 2 equals 0. Plugging it in, I get x equals negative 6 plus or minus the square root. 6 squared is 36 minus 4 times 1 times negative 2, all over 2 times 1. Simplifying, I get negative 6 plus or minus, starting here again, negative 4 times 1 times negative 2 is positive 8. 8 and 36 gives me 44 over 2. I know that the square root of 44 is 4 times 11. 4 comes out as a 2. Square root of 4 is 2. And everything is now divisible by 2, so we would simplify negative 3 plus or minus the square root of 11. I notice all the problems I've done go through this step of simplifying the radical to the new answer. Seems like that might have been a mistake, common mistake. 28. I have 2 equals negative 9x squared minus x. I want to move everything so my squared term is positive, so I'm going to add 9x squared and add x to both sides, giving me 9x squared plus x plus 2 equals 0. Plugging it into the quadratic formula, I get x equals negative 1 plus or minus the square root. 1 squared is 1 minus 4 times 9 times 2 all over 2 times 9. Simplifying that, I get negative 1 plus or minus. If I multiply this out, I get negative 72 plus 1 would give me negative 71 over 18. The only thing we can simplify here is bringing out that negative. Remember, when we square root the negative 1, it comes out as an I over 18. Number 36 would be the next one. Says 1/8 x squared plus x plus 5/2 equals 0. I'm going to multiply the whole equation by 8, giving me x squared plus 8x plus 20 equals 0. 8 divided by 2 is 4. 4 times 5 is the 20. We just got done doing the same problem with a negative 20. Let's see if that makes a big difference in the answer. X equals negative 8 plus or minus the square root. 8 squared is 64 minus 4 times 1 times 20 all over 2 times 1. Simplifying that, I get, starting in the inside here, negative 4 times 1 times 20 gives me negative 80. Negative 80 and 64 gives me negative 16. Notice we get a negative in here this time. Simplifying that, both parts of that can come out as square root of 16 is 4, square root of negative 1 is I. And let's divide everything by 2, negative 4 plus or minus 2I. 38. It says 2/3 x squared minus 20/3 x equals negative 100/6. First thing I'm going to do is add 100/6 to both sides. Now I'm going to multiply by the common denominator, which looks like a 6. 6 times 2/3 gives me 4x squared. 6 times 20/3 gives me negative 40x. And 6 times 100/6 is 100. Now, if you notice something like this, where everything is divisible by 4, we certainly can simplify before we plug it into the quadratic formula. It'll keep the numbers smaller. So I'm going to, instead of dividing, I'm going to multiply the whole equation by 1/4, which gives me x squared minus 10x plus 25. And if you remember your factoring, this one's going to come out relatively nice. I think it's still in the use the quadratic formula section, so let's use it. I get x equals negative 10 plus or minus the square root. Negative 10 squared is 100 minus 4 times 1 times 25 all over 2 times 1. And if you notice inside here, negative 4 times 1 times 25 is a negative 100. 100 minus 100 is 0. Square root of 0 is 0 over 2. And so either way, plus or minus, I'm going to get the answer 5. When we get one answer, we know that this thing had to have been a perfect squared trinomial. And the last one we're going to look at is question number 40. In number 40, we get p minus a half quantity squared equals p over 2. Before we can multiply by anything, we have to get rid of the squared, so I'm going to FOIL this out. p minus a half times p minus a half. First times first, outside times outside, inside times inside, last times last equals p squared. I'm going to minus the p over 2, minus the p over 2, and I get p squared minus half minus half minus half gives me minus 3 halves p plus 1/4 equals 0. Now we have to get rid of the fractions. Multiply the whole thing times 4. I get 4p squared. 4 times negative 3 halves gives me negative 6p, and 4 times a fourth is 1. Last thing we need to do with this one is plug it in, so I'm going to do that. P equals negative negative 6 plus or minus the square root, 36 minus 4 times 1, all over 2 times 4. Simplifying that, I get P equals 6 plus or minus 36 minus 16 gives me square root of 20. Square root of 20 we're going to write as 2 root 5 over 8. Everything again is divisible by 2, so we're going to say 3 plus or minus the square root of 5 over 4.